DW Africa Link.
Why can't we all live in peace? 3 years of war in Sudan have killed tens of thousands and displaced millions. Women and girls have faced some of the worst abuses. Marking the third anniversary, the African Union, the European Union, and other stakeholders met in Germany for the Sudan Conference, aiming to end the conflict and boost support for those affected. That's a good move. But how much of a difference will it make? That's what's coming up. I am Eddie Micah Jr., and you are welcome to Africa Link, the podcast connecting you to the stories that matter.
Africa Link, every weekday here on DW.
April 15th, 2026 marked 3 years since war erupted in Sudan, a conflict that has spiraled into what many call the world's worst humanitarian crisis. Millions have fled. 2/3 of the population now rely on aid, and the United Nations warns that more than 12 million women and girls are at risk of sexual violence. On the third anniversary, Germany hosted a high-level conference in Berlin with the European Union, the African Union, and other partners, pushing for a ceasefire and more support. That includes Germany providing an additional 20 million euros for the suffering population of Sudan. Let's bring in Ashan Abewadena, War Child's Emergency Response Manager for Sudan, and DW's Andrew Wasiki in Nairobi. Hello and welcome to Africa Link. Ashan, how did we get here 3 years into this war?
Thank you very much for having me. Just to answer that briefly, Sudan went through a people's revolution around 2019 where they overthrew a long-standing dictator. After this, there was a temporary kind of power sharing coalition that was in place until 3 years ago when tensions built up, and it started off with open conflict in Khartoum, and this quickly spread to other parts of the country and is continuously moving and shifting, affecting over 30 million people and displacing over 13 million people from their homes. It's been between two sectors fighting over control of the country and its resources. It is between the Sudanese armed forces in the east, out of Port Sudan, and the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces in Darfur and west of the country.
Unfortunately, nothing good comes out of war. It is the ordinary people that are suffering, especially women and children. You are a War Child's Emergency Response Manager for Sudan. Can you really highlight how this has been affecting women and children so far?
Sure, yeah. Going through 3 years of conflict, it changes, it has a massive impact on these children and women, as you talk about. Children's daily lives are shaped by news of death and destruction. Many have been displaced, as I said earlier, and even after this displacement, the threat of drone attacks are never really too far behind. Most children are just trying to stay safe, and many are living in very cramped and unstable environments in camps, with access to very little food and basic needs. The conflict and displacement has broken down traditional family structures that existed in Sudan for generations, and many children have seen the loss of family members, parents, caregivers. But also schools have been closed for now, coming up to 3 years. And without schools, children have no formal education, no formal learning opportunities, or really even safe spaces to interact with other children and to be children again. You can see the trauma wherever you look. Our partners say that children, they are quite often reserved, are quiet and afraid to really interact with each other or talk to even adults. Their lives really have been defined by fear, hunger, and loss over the past 3 years.
Being out of school all these years is going to have a major impact on the kids' lives, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. There's nearly 14 million children in school currently, And if we kind of think about that number, 14 million, that's roughly every single child in Germany not going to school. These numbers are really staggering if you think about each child, your children, your friends' children, and what it would really mean to them to miss 3 years of school. Because it's not just the basic education, it's the routines, the friends, just a normal life for children that they're missing out on. In Sudan, schools, a lot of schools are just not working. Many of them, as I said, are closed. The few that are working are completely overcrowded. And over time, children fall behind. They lose confidence. And the longer they're out of school, the harder it is to go back. A whole generation has been deprived of an education and a choice to choose what future they want for themselves. Watch Child and our partners provide safe spaces for children to come and play and be with other children. But what we're seeing here is they fill up very quickly. There are just more children who need support to come in than we can work with. And that really shows how big the need is.
Totally big need. And I'm just wondering the kind of psychological or emotional symptoms that you're also seeing most often in the children. Can you share some of that with us and what a day looks like based on all of this exposure to war?
Yeah, so every child reacts differently to conflict, but there are patterns of emotional and behavioral change that we are seeing and our partners are seeing quite often amongst these children. Some children become very quiet or withdrawn, almost, and some become quite numb to what is going on around them. And even when they are in school or in some form of learning opportunities, they can't concentrate, they lack sleep, they react badly to things. I remember one parent saying when I was there in Darfur recently that a lot of these children were born in camps into conflict. It is all they have known. And in some cases, even when there are drone strikes, they don't run or hide. It is like they're just used to the sounds of war. A lot of them have seen things that are just too much for their age, and that really doesn't go away. Communities in Sudan, they're doing what they can to support children. But when this goes on for so long, it becomes overwhelming and it gets really hard to keep supporting these children. And that's why mental health support is vital and a big part of War Child's work. Because children are going through a lot and they need support to kind of process all the trauma that they have been through.
And it comes across that there's no support. Why is that, Hashan?
I think the needs are huge, and I think it's just not been in the international community's attention.
That's exactly the problem, isn't it? That such a humanitarian crisis has not been top and center of international affairs. Isn't that disturbing?
Yes, indeed. And I think what news does come up on Sudan, it's often referred to as a forgotten crisis. And this is frustrating because it's not forgotten by the millions of cities affected, the communities that support each other, and local actors responding to their needs. It's a crisis that is ignored by the international community, despite the UN calling Sudan one of the worst humanitarian crises. This crisis has not gone away after 3 years. A lot of places it's getting worse. And as you say, it barely makes headlines. It's getting less and less attention.
And why is that, you think? Why is it ignored so often?
I think since the start of this conflict, various other conflicts have come around and taken the headlines. But I think what is really important here is to make sure that the local communities, the local actors who are responding, who are resilient, that they're doing their best to support, but we must not mistake their resilience for absence of need. And I think that need needs to be addressed. And what really is needed is like sustained attention and support from the international community, and not to lose focus on that. To continue to support local actors who are kind of bearing the burden of this crisis, but they should not be doing it alone. And they need flexible funding, they need safe access to children. And there are, as I said, so many gaps in child protection, in mental health and education. And we really need to continue to support that and fund that. There's been massive gaps in funding, and that is needed to make sure these children, their families, receive the basic necessities.
Right. Thank you very much, Ashan. Andrew, this is where the media comes in, as journalists come in. I'm just wondering, from Kenya, how is Sudan's war being discussed in the country and in the region? I mean, this is a conflict happening on the continent.
Thank you very much for having me, Eddie. Yeah, in Nairobi and across much of East Africa, the Sudan war is increasingly seen as both a humanitarian catastrophe and a regional security problem. It's not just a distant conflict because, Sudan did not just collapse overnight. The war is a result of decades of militarized politics. There has been the unfinished democratic transition. So whatever happens in Sudan will find its way all the way here to Kenya. So the conversation is no longer only about Khartoum or Darfur. We are all feeling the strain of displacement. There is a disrupted trade, and there is a diplomatic fallout. So Nairobi also remains one of the main cities where diplomats, mediators, and analysts and exiled Sudanese voices keep trying to shape the conversation. And we have gotten into problems because of that, because we have been told as Kenya that, you are housing both sides. It does not matter who you invite to the capital. You are giving them an avenue to have their meetings and all that. So the war is discussed here in very practical terms. Key aspects: refugees, regional influence, and whether peace efforts are failing. But we are a key country when it comes to this war.
Highlight a bit more how the conflict is affecting neighboring countries like Kenya. We're talking about economically, politically. Give us a sense of how it's being received.
It is a mixture of everything that you have just mentioned. The impact has been severe. Regionally, the war has forced millions from their homes, with large numbers crossing into neighboring countries. Let's start with countries that do border Sudan, including Chad, Egypt. They are finding or coming this republic. That means more pressure on already overstretched schools, clinics, things like camps, and also local food systems, like in Kakuma in Kenya, in northern Kenya, where most of such refugees are taken, not just water, but then there's competitions among pursuing their own interests. Here, this is what I told you, I mentioned before. You'll find that the two key figures, General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, who is the head of Sudanese armed forces, and Mohamed Hamdan Dagalo, also known as Hemedi. Kenya will always give venues to both of them, but mostly with Dagalo, who is the head of the Rapid Support Forces. And we have gotten into many, many problems. But then when you look at what analysts are saying, it is because this is helping the government, which is in place right now, politically. Humanitarian budgets that were already thin are being stretched even further. Yeah, because where there is war, there cannot be trade. A businessman will not move from Darfur all the way to Kampala, Uganda, because the road is not safe,
Right. Thank you very much, Andrew, for that. And so, Ashan, to try to tackle this conflict, bring about a ceasefire and end the war, Germany is hosting the Sudan Conference, along with other partners, the African Union, the EU, France, the UK, and the US. They want to bring Sudan back into diplomatic focus after years of stalled peace efforts. And that's also something we need to hammer. There's been attempts to end the conflict. It just did not work out. So what do you make of the Berlin Conference? And how optimistic are you that this is the way to go to try and end this conflict?
I think whatever opportunities there are to bring people to the table and to negotiate a long-standing peace needs to be pursued by all actors, and the international community needs to continue to make sure this happens with the parties involved, but also others are working, supporting these parties at conflict. But I think I want to go back to the kind of issue facing children, if that's okay, because all these need to be supported with continued funding to meet the needs of children, the children affected by this conflict, the ones that have suffered through protection issues, mental health issues, education, and continued funding to really make sure these children meet their basic needs are vital and needs to be part of those discussions as well.
That is for sure very key when it comes to funding to take care of these children that we've been talking about. There's a huge funding gap. Germany is planning to increase its funding by 20 million euros to help tackle or support lives on the ground. I'm assuming you'd say that's better than nothing, but obviously much more is needed, right?
Absolutely. I think, it is. It's a good start, but we're talking of millions of people affected by this conflict. We're talking about 13 million people leaving their homes, 14 million children out of school, something like 30 million people needing urgent humanitarian assistance. That's a massive proportion of that country's population. And if you look at those numbers, it's a drop in the ocean, if I can say that.
Right. And we are talking about 3 years of fighting so far. If the war continues into a fourth year, how bad are things really going to be?
I think it just continues to get worse. It's already bad, and those, as I said, these numbers become harder to get your head around. But War Child has been working with children acutely affected by conflict for over 25 years, and we know that the longer conflict goes on, the harder it is for children to recover. There's a real risk of a whole generation just growing up in a crisis. You have families being displaced over and over again. And for children, this means losing schools, losing friends, and just a sense of stability. And children need things like protection, mental health support, and education. And this cannot happen as the conflict goes on and on. And without that, it really affects the way children grow up. Again, I've said this before, but we've seen communities in Sudan supporting each other. But with more and more families being displaced, with a continued lack of basic services like health and schools, they're stretched beyond imaginable, and a whole generation, if not more, is at risk.
What does recovery look like for a child who has spent years, many years in conflict?
Yeah, so despite the conflict, despite the situation, recovery is possible, but it takes time. Children are incredibly resilient, and I think the first steps are safety and security. That's the starting, the building blocks, if you like. And from there, they need opportunities to return to routines, to be able to play and learn. What really helps is having safe spaces where they can just be children again. Stigma on children, but also works with families, parents, teachers, and community leaders to make sure children have the right support around them, whether this is at home, in schools, or in their communities. You can start seeing small changes, children opening up a little bit more, engaging again, feeling a bit safer. But it is not a quick win. It takes time, it's gradual, and it needs continued and sustained support. Especially when life is so unstable, even 3 years on.
Right. Thank you, Ashan. Final round to wrap this up. Andrew, there are many that suggest that this should have been an African Union push to end a conflict on its own continent. And there are many that criticize regional bodies for not doing enough to end such conflicts. Is there a sense that this is being taken seriously and that looking forward, more effort is on the way to try to end this conflict?
Well, when you look at what many analysts are saying is that the African Union has failed when it comes to handling such issues as conflict in the DRC and conflict in Somalia. Now, our topic for today, conflict in Sudan. They are saying that the African Union should play a major role. They will issue a statement about a drone attack in Sudan that has killed dozens. But then when it comes to the ground, they are not doing enough.
Right. And I believe the African Union, to be fair, would say they have been involved in different peace talks and negotiations to try to end this. But as Ashan said earlier, it clearly is not an easy task to deliberate on ending a conflict. And I guess some things are just difficult to get through. But fair enough point. Thank you very much, Andrew. Ashan, you have the final words. What's your final message for the international community with the aim of ending the conflict and getting all the support needed?
Thanks for that. The Sudanese communities and NGOs have been resilient and been doing all they can to support the Sudanese people in need in very difficult circumstances. But this resilience is kind of taken for granted and is misunderstood as an absence of need. Local coping systems are critical, but they cannot and they should not be bearing the burden of this crisis alone. Local actors need support from the international community. They need flexible funding. Because the situation is changing all the time. They need safe access to children and families. And there are still big gaps in child protection, mental health support, and education. So what is really needed now is a sustained attention on Sudan and support. And for the international community not to lose focus on Sudan. Children cannot afford to be left behind as this crisis continues.
I think it's important that we keep talking about this, and hopefully it is making more and more rounds and it's being put top on the agenda for it to be addressed. Because as you say, kids are suffering the brunt of this conflict. So hopefully world leaders are listening. Ashan Abewadena, War Child's Emergency Response Manager for Sudan, and DW's Andrew Oseke in Nairobi, Kenya. Thank you very much to the both of you for sharing your thoughts with us.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for your time, and thanks for having me.
As Sudan enters the fourth year of war, millions remain caught in the crossfire. Families displaced, children malnourished, and futures on hold. Aid groups say the world can no longer look away.
3 years of war in Sudan have created the world's largest humanitarian crisis. The conflict has ravaged livelihoods, uprooted communities, and driven millions of people into hunger. Famine still stalks parts of this country. Aid workers, trucks, and warehouses continue to come under attack, putting the lives of our colleagues at risk and disrupting our assistance. Yet for millions of people here in Sudan, WFP is the only lifeline. Every month, we reach around 4 million people with food and nutrition support. This assistance saves lives, it keeps families going, and it holds communities together. The needs are far greater than the money available. So without urgent funding, the fragile progress we have made could now quickly reverse.
The UN and aid groups are calling for an immediate ceasefire, full humanitarian access, and more funding for life-saving aid. They are also urging countries to tackle the root causes of the conflict, including arms flows and the war economy, and to step up diplomatic efforts to push for peace before the situation worsens. What do you think? Share your thoughts with us on Facebook at DW Africa. Listen on Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And subscribe to our DW Africa YouTube channel so you never miss an episode. This show was co-produced and edited by Isaac Mugabe. And I am Eddie Micah Jr. Thanks for listening.